Look up at the night sky, and you will find a story written in starlight. Nestled within the constellation Taurus is a V-shaped cluster of stars known as the Hyades. Ancient Greeks did not just see random points of light. They saw a celestial sisterhood, a group of nymphs whose endless tears were said to fall as life-giving rain upon the earth. By the end of this, you will uncover the profound connection between human emotion and the very weather that shaped an ancient world. We will explore why these sisters were eternally weeping and how their grief became a source of life for civilizations. What forgotten truth about our own relationship with nature is still hidden in their stars? Their identity was rooted in the very fabric of the cosmos. The Hyades were not merely mythical figures but a celestial sisterhood born from two powerful primordial forces. Their father was the Titan Atlas, the being condemned to hold up the sky for all eternity, and their mother was the Oceanid Pleione, a nymph of the vast encircling sea. This lineage made them sisters to another famous star cluster, the Pleiades, placing them at the heart of a sprawling divine family. Beyond their stellar ancestry, these nymphs held a vital role in the earthly realm. They were chosen as the divine attendants and nursemaids to the god Dionysus, the deity of wine, ecstasy, and rebirth. It was their sacred duty to raise and protect the infant god, shielding him from the wrath of the jealous goddess Hera. This position granted them immense favor and cemented their importance, not just as distant stars, but as active, nurturing forces within the pantheon. Their story, written in the heavens, was always intertwined with the deepest cycles of life and loss on the earth below. That celestial V in the constellation Taurus is not just an artist's sketch. It is one of our nearest stellar neighbors, a true family of stars known as the Hyades cluster. These stars are not scattered randomly across the sky. They are physically bound together by gravity, traveling through the cosmos as a single, magnificent unit. Their proximity to Earth, a mere 150 light-years away, makes them appear brilliantly clear and distinct. That distinctive V-shape formed by the brightest stars in the cluster points directly toward the red giant star Aldebaran, which acts like a fiery eye in the head of the bull. This pattern is so prominent and unmistakable that it has served as a celestial landmark for every human civilization. So how did this specific star pattern become the weeping sisters of myth? Ancient people did not separate the scientific from the sacred. They looked up at that tight, shimmering group and saw a gathering, a council, a sisterhood. The stars seemed to huddle together in a celestial embrace, their light flickering like tears in the darkness. When the rainy seasons arrived, this cluster was often high in the night sky. The connection became inevitable in the storytelling mind. The sisters were in the heavens and their sorrow was falling to the earth below. The astronomy did not contradict the myth. It gave the story its home, painting the legend directly onto the canvas of the night for all to see. Their celestial story begins with a profound and earthly sorrow. At the heart of their legend is a brother named Hyas, a mighty hunter beloved by all his sisters. He was their pride, their joy, a central figure in their lives. But during a hunt, a terrible tragedy unfolded. Hyas was killed, attacked by a wild lion or a fearsome boar depending on the telling. His life was cut violently short. The news of his death shattered the sisters. Their grief was so immense, so all-consuming that they could not be consoled. They wept without end, their sorrow an ocean with no shore. Their tears fell upon the earth in an unceasing downpour, a manifestation of pure divine mourning. The gods themselves looked down upon this display of sisterly love and loss. Moved by such powerful devotion, they chose to grant the Hyades a form of eternal life. They gathered the weeping sisters and placed them as stars in the night sky, immortalizing their love for Hyas forever. Yet even in the heavens their grief remained. Their tears continued to fall, not as sorrow now, but as the life-giving rain that nourishes the world. Their story tells us that even the deepest loss can be transformed into a force of creation, a celestial reminder that love endures beyond death itself. This transformation of grief into nourishment is one of mythology's most powerful ideas. The ancient mind saw the world as a living, breathing entity where every natural event was a manifestation of a divine will or emotion. A sudden storm was not just a change in atmospheric pressure, it was the rage of a god. A gentle breeze was the whisper of a spirit. In this worldview, the life-giving spring rains that broke long droughts were not random. They were a gift, a blessing, and they demanded a story. The legend of the Hyades provided that story, a poetic and deeply human explanation for a vital agricultural cycle. The sisters' tears were not a symbol of endless despair. They were the ultimate act of empathy from the heavens, a celestial acknowledgement that even in the realm of the gods, loss could be felt so deeply that it would water the entire world. When farmers looked to the sky and saw the Hyades cluster rising before the rainy season, they did not see cold, distant stars. They saw the divine nursemaids, the eternal sisters, weeping for their brother once more. And as their tears fell, the seeds in the earth would stir, the crops would drink, and the community would survive another year. This was not mere superstition. It was a way of understanding the fragile dependence of human life on the natural world, a reminder that the rain which fed them was born from the same profound love and loss that every human heart understands. That deep, emotional connection between the stars and the rain was not just poetic. It was a matter of survival. For the farmers and sailors of ancient Greece, the Hyades were not a myth to be told by the fireplace, but a celestial almanac to be memorized. Their precise movements dictated the rhythm of life itself. The critical events were their heliacal rising and setting. A heliacal rising is the day a star or star cluster first becomes visible in the eastern sky just before sunrise, after a period of being hidden by the sun's glare. Conversely, a heliacal setting is its final appearance in the western sky just after sunset, before it vanishes for a season. The heliacal rising of the Hyades in the autumn coincided perfectly with the start of the Mediterranean rainy season. When that V-shaped cluster reappeared in the dawn sky, it was the universe's signal. It was time to prepare for the coming storms, to ensure your ship was safely in harbor, and to plant your crops with the certainty that the life-giving rains were on their way. Their heliacal setting in the spring, when they disappeared from the evening sky, marked the end of those heavy rains and the beginning of the drier summer months. This was not a vague correlation. It was a precise, reliable, and repeatable cycle written in the stars. The sisters' grief had a schedule, and by reading it, an entire civilization could plan its year, its harvest, and its very survival. They were the original weather forecasters, their celestial tears a promise of the water that would fill the cisterns and nourish the fields. Their sacred duty as nursemaids would define their legacy just as much as their celestial tears. After the tragic death of his mortal mother, Semele, the infant Dionysus was vulnerable. His father, Zeus, king of the gods, needed a safe haven for his son, a place far from the vengeful gaze of his wife Hera. He chose the Hyades. These sisters were more than just nymphs. They were paragons of nurturing strength. They received the divine infant and took him to the remote mountains of Nysa, a mythical land shrouded in secrecy. There they became his protectors, his teachers, and his first family. They raised the god of ecstasy and wine, teaching him the secrets of nature, the arts of cultivation, and the mysteries of the wild. It was a monumental task, guarding the most unpredictable and powerful of gods during his most defenseless years. Their success in shielding Dionysus solidified their status as loyal and indispensable figures in the divine order. In gratitude for their unwavering protection and care, Zeus immortalized them not just as stars, but as the very stars whose rising brought the nourishing rains. This act wove their two great roles into a single celestial tapestry. Their tears for their brother Hyas gave the world water, and their devotion to the infant Dionysus earned them the eternal honor of delivering that gift from the heavens. Their story is a profound reminder that in the ancient world, even the weather was a chapter in a much larger, more human story of love, duty, and divine reward. To understand the Hyades is to know their parents, for their lineage was a map of the entire cosmos. Their father was the Titan Atlas, a being of immense strength tasked with an eternal punishment. He did not simply carry the world on his shoulders, he held up the very dome of the sky itself, a perpetual pillar between the earth and the heavens. Their mother was the Oceanid Pleione, whose name translates to the sailing queen. She was a nymph of the vast encircling sea, a daughter of the primordial ocean. This union was a marriage of the ultimate opposites, the unyielding celestial firmament and the fluid, life-giving waters of the deep. From Atlas, the sisters inherited their permanence and their place in the starry vault, a steadfastness that defies time. From Pleione, they gained their connection to moisture, to the nurturing rains and the very tears they would shed. This dual heritage made them uniquely suited for their destiny. They were born from the fundamental forces of the world, and when the great war between the Titans and the Olympian gods reshaped the universe, their family was at its heart. Atlas led the Titan army against Zeus, and for his defiance he was given his eternal burden. Yet, in a fascinating twist, his daughters were welcomed into the new Olympian order. They were not punished for their father's rebellion, but instead rewarded for their own virtues of loyalty and nurture. Their story tells us that in the new world ruled by Zeus, personal merit could transcend even the most fraught family history, allowing these children of a defeated Titan to become essential, life-giving figures in the very cosmos their father was condemned to support. But the Hyades were never alone in the sky. Gaze a little further into the constellation Taurus, and you will find their famous sisters, the Hyades, another glittering cluster of stars. These two celestial families, born from the same parents, Atlas and Pleione, share the same patch of sky, yet their stories and their appearances could not be more different. The Hyades are often depicted as a small, tight-knit dipper shape, a delicate gathering of 7 sisters who were placed in the heavens to escape the relentless pursuit of the hunter Orion. Their myth is one of flight and preservation, a story of beauty sought and protected. The Hyades, in stark contrast, are a more open, V-shaped assembly, and their legend is rooted not in escape but in profound, active grief. One sisterhood represents a beautiful, eternal retreat, while the other embodies a sorrow so powerful it becomes a creative, life-sustaining force for the world below. This divergence in their myths is mirrored in their very nature. The Hyades are famously elusive. On a clear night, most people can only see 6 of the 7 sisters, leading to ancient tales of a lost or hidden sibling. The Hyades, by comparison, are bold and unmistakable, their V-shape a clear celestial signpost. Was this difference in brightness and story a form of ancient celestial storytelling, a way to distinguish between 2 groups of sisters with vastly different roles? While there is no direct myth of a bitter feud between them, their contrasting fates in the stars suggest a narrative of differentiation. One group is defined by what they fled from, the other by what they loved and lost. One shines with a quiet, mysterious beauty, the other weeps with a purpose that nourishes civilizations. They are 2 sides of the same cosmic coin, a reminder that even within a single family, destiny can write vastly different stories in the stars. Even the greatest heroes of ancient Greece looked to these stars for guidance. In Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, the mighty warrior Achilles is preparing his shield, a magnificent object crafted by the god Hephaestus. The poet describes the shield's design, and upon its surface he places the celestial bodies. He writes of the Pleiades and the Hyades and mighty Orion. The poet calls them the signs men watch for as they cross the sea. This single line is a powerful testament to their role in daily life. They were not just mythic figures, they were practical navigational markers, their position in the sky a trusted guide for every mariner braving the treacherous Mediterranean. But it is in the Odyssey where their true nature as storm-bringers is made terrifyingly clear. As Odysseus is sailing home, the god Poseidon, enraged at the hero, unleashes a cataclysmic tempest. Homer describes the scene with chilling precision. The east wind and the south wind clashed, and the stormy west wind and the north wind born in the bright sky rolled up a heavy sea. It is at this moment of absolute chaos that the poet tells us the knees of Odysseus trembled and his own heart failed him, and then he makes a direct and telling comparison. He says this was the moment when the Hyades were set driven by the west wind, bringing storm and rain. The connection is explicit and undeniable. In the mind of a Greek listener, the most violent storm imaginable was directly linked to the motion of these celestial sisters. Their appearance was not just a signal for rain, it was the very embodiment of a divine fury capable of shaking the courage of a legendary hero. This was their established role, deeply woven into the cultural consciousness. They were the celestial clock for the farmer and the omen of the storm for the sailor, a constant, powerful presence in both the practical and the poetic imagination. Centuries after Homer, a different kind of poet offered a guide for survival, not heroism. Hesiod's Works and Days is a farmer's almanac written in verse, a practical manual where the stars are not omens of divine rage, but a celestial calendar for the plough. For the common person, the Hyades were not about epic storms, but about the simple, urgent need to eat. Hesiod gives his brother, Perseus, a direct and vital instruction. When the mighty Orion appears, he writes, "Then set your slaves to winnowing the good grain." But he follows this with a command tied directly to our celestial sisters. When Orion and the dog star seek the middle of the sky, and rosy-fingered dawn looks upon the Hyades, he advises, then it is time to cut off the clusters of grapes. His guidance is even more precise for the crucial task of ploughing. He marks two distinct seasons for this work. The first begins at the summer solstice, but the second, and more important, is tied to the heliacal setting of the Hyades in the spring. When the Pleiades and the Hyades and the strength of Orion sink into the ocean, he writes, that is the time to remember your work and plough. This was the signal that the heavy rains were ending. The soil was moist and workable, perfect for sowing the spring crops that would carry a family through the year. This was not poetry for entertainment. It was a survival code passed down through generations. A farmer who ignored the Hyades risked everything, his plough breaking on dry summer earth or his seeds washing away in autumn floods. Their celestial grief was the most reliable clock he owned, its timing dictating the very rhythm of food, wealth, and life itself. This celestial sisterhood did not stop at the borders of Greece. When their myth traveled to Rome, something fascinating happened to their identity. The Romans, ever practical and grounded, looked up at that same V-shaped cluster and saw something entirely different. They called them the Succuli, a name that translates to the little pigs. This was not a random or derogatory nickname. It reflected a fundamental shift in cultural perspective. For the Romans, the primary importance of these stars was their connection to the rainy season, the Suctus Tempora. The word for rain, succula, sounded remarkably similar to their word for a female pig, succula. This linguistic link created a powerful new image. The stars were not weeping women, but a litter of piglets, animals intrinsically linked to fertility, nourishment, and the earth. Pigs were a vital source of food and a symbol of agricultural prosperity. This Roman reinterpretation stripped away the tragic, emotional Greek backstory and replaced it with a symbol of pure, earthy abundance. The rains the stars heralded were no longer the tears of grieving sisters, but the life-giving moisture that ensured healthy livestock and full larders. The Succuli were not defined by their sorrow, but by their function. They were a celestial farm signal, their appearance promising the conditions that would fatten the very animals they were named after. This transformation reveals how the Romans often absorbed Greek mythology, filtering it through their own pragmatic worldview. They valued the myth not for its poetic depth, but for its practical utility, remaking the Hyades into a symbol that spoke directly to their own values of agriculture, order, and tangible reward. The Roman vision of the Hyades as a celestial farm signal was just one interpretation in a vast, ancient world. Far beyond the Mediterranean, other great civilizations were also reading the stars, and the Hyades cluster captured their attention with a similar yet distinct urgency. For the meticulous sky watchers of Babylon, this star group held no tears and no pigs. They integrated the Hyades into their most important celestial creation, the zodiac. The Babylonians saw the entire constellation Taurus as a celestial bull, and the Hyades formed its distinctive face. They named this specific asterism Emuel. Al-Lul, which can be translated as the star of the seed furrow or even the jaw of the bull. This was not a poetic name. It was a direct, functional title tied to their complex calendar and their understanding of the agricultural year. The bull was a universal symbol of strength and fertility, and the position of its starry face in the sky signaled the time for plowing and sowing. Their observations were so precise that they could predict the lunar cycle's interaction with the cluster, using it as one of many celestial markers in their highly advanced system of mathematical astronomy. The same stars that represented divine grief to the Greeks were, for the Babylonians, a critical cog in the cosmic clockwork, a calculator in the sky that helped govern their organized, temple-centered world. This reveals a fundamental truth. While the Greeks saw a story of family and loss, the Babylonians saw a manual for civilization, written in the same points of light. The Egyptians, gazing up from the banks of the Nile, saw something else entirely. Their mythology was deeply intertwined with bull cults, and the constellation Taurus was sacred. The star we know as Aldebaran, the fiery red eye that anchors the Hyades V, was of particular importance. They associated it with the god Osiris, the deity of death, resurrection, and the life-giving annual flooding of the Nile. The heliacal rising of this entire region of the sky, with the Hyades at its heart, often coincided with the beginning of the Nile's inundation. This flood was the foundation of Egyptian life, depositing the rich black silt that made the desert bloom. So, while they may not have had a specific myth for a weeping sisterhood, they saw in that cluster a divine promise of rebirth and fertility. The stars heralded the arrival of water that would not fall from the sky, but rise from the earth itself, a different kind of celestial blessing for a river-based civilization. From the mathematical Babylonians to the resurrection-focused Egyptians, the Hyades were always a herald. Their universal recognition points to a shared human need to find order, meaning, and survival instructions in the predictable dance of the heavens. The relationship with the Hyades was not one of passive observation, but of active, vital engagement. For ancient farmers whose lives depended on the timely arrival of the autumn rains, the celestial sisters were not just a signal, they were deities to be appeased. While no grand temples were built in their name, their worship was woven into the fabric of rural life through small, personal rituals. Imagine a farmer watching the V-shaped cluster rise in the pre-dawn sky. He would not simply note the date and begin plowing. He would likely make a small votive offering, a humble gift to honor the nymphs and encourage their life-giving tears. Archaeological evidence from rural shrines across Greece includes countless small terracotta figurines depicting women, often in a posture of mourning or dancing. While these figures are rarely labeled, scholars suggest they could represent nymphs like the Hyades, local deities of springs and rain. Pouring a libation of wine, milk, or honey onto the earth was a common act of devotion, a symbolic sharing of nourishment meant to invite a reciprocal gift from the heavens. The liquid offering mirrored the rain they so desperately needed, a sympathetic magic that asked the sky to weep so the earth could drink. We can piece together the nature of their prayers from broader hymns to the nymphs. These were not quiet, church-like recitations. They were likely performed at rustic altars near springs or in caves, places considered direct conduits to the divine, watery world of the nymphs. A prayer might have called upon the Hyades by their collective name, or by their title as the nurses of Dionysus, reminding them of their sacred duty to nurture all growing things. The plea would have been direct and heartfelt. "O revered Hyades, celestial nurses, you who taught the vine to grow, send now your nourishing tears upon our fields. Let the seed swell in the dark earth as the infant god once grew under your care." This was a prayer that connected their mythic roles directly to the survival of the community. They were not abstract stars, but divine caregivers, and the people's rituals were a way of inserting their own humble needs into that cosmic story of care and loss. The rising of the sisters was not just a calendar event, it was the opening of a celestial dialogue, a season for reminding the heavens of a bond forged in grief and gratitude, a bond that, if honored, would once again turn sorrow into abundance for all. These celestial sisters stepped off the star charts and into the homes of ordinary people through the art painted on everyday pottery. On a beautifully preserved red figure vase from the 5th century BC, we see them not as distant stars but as a group of women in motion. Their heads are often tilted downward, their hands raised to their faces in a universal gesture of grief. Sometimes they are shown holding hydrias, the tall water jugs used by Greek women to fetch water from the public fountain. This is a powerful visual pun. The jugs they carry are for earthly water, while their very presence on the vase points to the celestial waters they command. One particularly poignant scene shows them gathered around their dead brother, Hyas, their bodies forming a circle of shared sorrow that mirrors their clustered appearance in the night sky. The artist has frozen a single, eternal moment of mythological time, transforming a personal tragedy into a public lesson on loss and its purpose. These were not generic mourners. They were the Hyades, and their depiction served as a constant, tangible reminder that the rain nurturing the vineyards and olive groves was born from a love as deep as any human family's. The choice to paint them on wine vessels is especially telling. As the nurses of Dionysus, the god of the vine, their image on a cup used for wine directly connected their life-giving tears to the fruit of the god they raised. Every time a person drank from such a vessel, they were participating in a cycle of nourishment that began with celestial grief and ended with earthly celebration. These artworks were more than decoration. They were a form of silent prayer, a way to keep the myth and its meaning alive in the rhythm of daily life, ensuring that no one forgot the divine source of the water that filled their wells and their wineskins. That ancient connection between the stars and the seasons was not just mystical intuition. It was a precise observation of planetary mechanics, a dance of the Earth that modern science can now fully explain. The key lies in understanding the Earth's tilt and its annual journey around the Sun. As our planet orbits, our nighttime view of the sky slowly shifts. Different constellations become visible at different times of the year. The Hyades cluster's heliacal rising in the autumn, that critical reappearance just before dawn, occurs because the Earth has moved to a position in its orbit where the Sun no longer blocks our view of that part of space. This astronomical event happens like clockwork every single year, and it coincides perfectly with a major shift in Mediterranean weather patterns. During the autumn, the jet stream, that powerful river of air high in the atmosphere, begins to dip southward. This pulls cooler, moisture-laden air from the Atlantic over the Mediterranean basin. The result is the onset of the rainy season. The ancient Greeks did not know about jet streams or orbital mechanics, but their centuries of meticulous observation allowed them to pin this reliable weather change to an equally reliable celestial event. They saw the Hyades rise and knew the rains would follow, creating a predictive model that was, for its time, brilliantly accurate. Their myth gave a human face to a complex atmospheric process, but the correlation they observed was undeniably real. The tears of the sisters were a poetic explanation for a verifiable scientific phenomenon, a beautiful story built on a foundation of empirical truth. So the next time you hear a weather forecast, remember that the first meteorologists were not in a television studio, but were farmers and sailors looking up at a V-shaped cluster of stars, reading the sky's most ancient and reliable calendar. Yet even the most stable stars seem to shift when viewed across centuries. As Greek culture spread with the conquests of Alexander the Great, the intellectual center of the world moved to Alexandria, and with it, the interpretation of the Hyades began a subtle but profound transformation. The Hellenistic period was an age of rigorous scholarship and systematic cataloging, where myths were often analyzed as allegory rather than taken as literal truth. In this new academic atmosphere, the poignant story of the Weeping Sisters started to lose some of its raw emotional power. Scholars and poets began to emphasize their function over their familial grief. They were less often portrayed as a specific group of sisters mourning their brother Hyas, and more frequently referenced as a reliable celestial signal for navigation and agriculture. Their identity was slowly untethered from its mythological roots and became more closely tied to their practical, observable effect on the earthly world. The grief that once defined them was becoming a footnote, while their role as celestial timekeepers moved to the forefront. This was not a rejection of the myth, but a refinement of it, an adaptation for an era that prized utility and universal knowledge. The sisters were evolving from deeply personal figures of loss into more generalized, though still vital, deities of weather and seasons. By the time the Roman Empire absorbed Greek culture, this process was nearly complete. The Romans, as we've seen, had already rebranded them as the Succuli, the little pigs. This was the final step in a long evolution from mournful nymphs to agricultural symbols. In the vast, organized, and practical Roman world, the myth's emotional core was largely set aside. The Hyades were respected and observed, but their story was no longer primarily one of tears. They were seen as a celestial mechanism, a part of the great cosmic machine that ensured the grain harvest and filled the wine barrels of the empire. Their journey reflects a broader pattern in the ancient world, where the intimate, personified forces of nature were gradually systematized into the predictable, impersonal laws of a universe governed by reason and empire. Their story did not fade with the marble of antiquity but found new breath in the ink of poets. Long after the last libation was poured for the celestial nymphs, their name echoed through the libraries and studies of Renaissance Europe. Scholars rediscovering Greek texts brought the Hyades back into the literary imagination, but they were no longer seen as simple weather signs. For the Elizabethan poets, they became a ready-made symbol of divine sorrow, a classical reference that lent gravity and a sense of timeless grief to their verse. You can hear it in the measured lines of the 16th and 17th centuries, where the weeping stars are invoked to mirror a lover's despair or the melancholy of a fleeting season. Their tears were aestheticized, transformed from a farmer's practical concern into a metaphor for the human condition itself. This was a shift from the field to the page, from a prayer for rain to a meditation on loss. The sisters had become a beautiful, distant image of sadness, their celestial grief now serving the needs of art and courtly expression, a far cry from the earthy, survival-based rituals of the ancient world. Yet even in this new role, their core identity as a sisterhood bound by emotion remained beautifully intact, proving that some bonds are too powerful for even centuries to break. Their celestial grief finds echoes in the monsoons of India. There, the powerful god Indra, king of the heavens, wielded the thunderbolt and commanded the rains. Unlike the collective sorrow of the Hyades, Indra's release of water was an act of royal power and cosmic duty, a heroic feat that sustained the world. In the ancient Mesopotamian epics, the primordial goddess Tiamat was the personification of the saltwater ocean, a chaotic and creative force from whom the world was formed. While not a rain deity in the same sense, she represented the ultimate source of all waters, a vast maternal figure whose essence was necessary for life. yet whose untamed power could bring deluge and disorder. The Aztecs looked to Tlaloc, a god whose domain was not just rain but also lightning, floods, and droughts. His nature was deeply dualistic. He could provide the life-giving showers that made the maize grow, but he also sent destructive hailstorms and could withhold the rains to punish humanity. Appeasing Tlaloc required specific rituals, and it was believed he required the tears of children to bring the rain, a chilling parallel to the Hyades' own endless weeping. Across these cultures, from the Greek sisters to the Hindu king, we see a universal human need to personify the weather. The rain was never just water falling from the sky. It was the tears of a goddess, the gift of a king, or the conditional offering of a temperamental god. These myths transformed the terrifying randomness of nature into a story with characters, motives, and emotions. You could pray to them, bargain with them, and understand your place in a world where the rain that fed you was a conscious act, a response from the heavens to the pleas of the earth. What does this tell us about our ancestors? They looked at the immense, impersonal forces of nature and saw a reflection of themselves, their own capacity for profound love, immense power, and deep, world-shaking sorrow. Greek nymphs were far more than decorative figures in a pastoral landscape. They were the living, breathing soul of the natural world itself. To understand the Hyades is to grasp the profound power and peril of being a nymph. These spirits personified specific places and forces, a spring, a tree, a mountain, or in the case of the Hyades, the life-giving rain. This connection granted them a certain wild autonomy, an existence that was powerful yet perilously tied to their domain. They were not Olympian gods ruling from on high, but local deities whose influence was immediate and intimate. Their power was real, but so was their vulnerability. The Hyades exemplify this complex existence perfectly. They were not passive mourners. Their grief was so potent it altered the very climate of the Mediterranean, a clear display of their inherent power as nature spirits. Yet their story also reveals the tragic constraints of their world. Their fate, to be eternally weeping in the sky, was a direct result of their deep, emotional connection to their brother, a mortal. This is a recurring theme in nymph mythology. Their lives and freedoms are constantly interrupted, reshaped, or ended by the actions and desires of gods and mortals alike. Their relationships with the divine were equally double-edged. Being chosen by Zeus to nurse his son was a great honor for the Hyades, a mark of their trustworthiness and nurturing essence. It lifted them from being local nymphs of a spring or a grove to figures of cosmic importance. Yet this honor also placed them directly in the crosshairs of Hera's divine jealousy, forcing them into a role of protectors and hiding. This patronage came with a price, weaving their destiny into the volatile politics of Olympus. Their ultimate reward, a place in the stars, immortalized them but also fixed their identity in an eternal state of sorrowful service. They became a celestial function, their personal tragedy forever leveraged for the benefit of humanity. This is the core of the nymph archetype, a being of immense natural power who is simultaneously acted upon by greater forces, their autonomy celebrated in myth yet often sacrificed to a larger cosmic story. They are the vibrant, essential, and sometimes tragic heartbeat of the wild world, and the Hyades are their most poignant, rain-soaked echo. Modern telescopes have peeled back the celestial veil, revealing the Hyades not as weeping nymphs but as a brilliant stellar nursery. We now know this cluster is approximately 625 million years old, a middle-aged family of stars born from the same cosmic cloud of gas and dust. Its members, nearly all moving in the same direction through space, are bound by gravity on a shared journey. This motion creates a fascinating illusion from our vantage point on Earth. The cluster's path makes it appear to stream toward a point near the bright star Betelgeuse in Orion, a phenomenon known as its convergent point. By measuring this motion and the subtle wobble of its stars, astronomers have pinpointed its distance with incredible precision, placing it just 150 light-years away, making it our closest open star cluster. This scientific portrait stands in stark contrast to the ancient myth. Where the Greeks saw a story of eternal grief, we see a physical reality of stellar evolution and galactic dynamics. The cluster's true composition is a mix of brilliant white stars and cooler orange giants, a far cry from the shimmering tiers of a celestial sisterhood. Yet, is this modern understanding a replacement for the old stories, or does it add a new, profound layer of meaning? The ancient myth connected human emotion to the rain that fed civilization. Our science connects the very atoms in our bodies to the nuclear furnaces of these distant suns. We are literally made of stardust, and the Hyades are some of our closest stellar relatives. The poetry has not been erased by the data, it has been transformed. We no longer see their tears in the rain, but we can now trace the lineage of the elements that make the rain and us possible. The sisters' story endures not as a literal explanation, but as a timeless human attempt to find our place within a vast and beautiful cosmos. That ancient name, the Hyades, still echoes through our modern world in surprising ways. One of its most widespread appearances is on the roads of our cities, emblazoned on the side of a famous Japanese car, the Nissan Cedric. A luxury sedan produced for decades, its name was a deliberate choice to evoke classic elegance and reliability. While the car itself has no direct link to mythology, its very branding demonstrates how these celestial sisters have been translated into a modern symbol of quality and enduring performance. The name carries a whisper of the classical, a subtle nod to a timeless story that lends an air of sophistication to a machine of the present. This is how myths often survive, not in their full narrative form, but as powerful, resonant names that we attach to the artifacts of our daily lives. The leap from a star cluster that brings rain to a dependable family car is not as large as it seems. Both are seen as providers, one of water for the earth, the other of comfort and security for the journey. The myth is repurposed, its core idea of nurturing service subtly transferred to a new context. Beyond the world of commerce, the Hyades have found a fertile home in the realms of science fiction and fantasy. The legendary horror writer H.P. Lovecraft placed the cluster at the center of his cosmic mythology. In his stories, the Hyades are not a place of gentle sorrow but a distant, terrifying cradle of alien life. He writes of a monstrous, amorphous being from that region of space, a creature that drifts between the stars. For Lovecraft, the name Hyades evoked not nurturing tears, but the chilling vastness and indifference of the cosmos. The sisters' legacy was twisted into something alien and unknowable, a perfect example of how modern creators mine ancient symbols for new kinds of dread and wonder. In the immense universe of the online game EVE Online, the Hyades constellation exists as a region of strategic importance, a place of conflict and resource gathering for thousands of players. Here, the name is stripped of all its emotional weight and becomes pure geography, a coordinate in a digital cosmos. Yet its selection for this virtual world still relies on its established identity as a notable celestial landmark. We see a clear pattern emerging. The original myth, rich with emotion and purpose, is flattened or reinterpreted to serve new functions. The sisters become a brand, a setting for horror, or a map label. Their grief is forgotten, but their name endures as a vessel we can fill with new meanings, a testament to the sheer staying power of a story first told under the Mediterranean night sky thousands of years ago. Their tears were a human truth written across the heavens. The story of the Hyades resonated so deeply because it did not shy away from the raw reality of grief. Everyone in the ancient world understood loss, the sharp, personal pain of a loved one taken too soon. The sisters' endless weeping for Hyas gave that universal feeling a divine form. It was a sacred validation of human sorrow, a promise that even the gods acknowledged the depth of such a wound. Their grief was not a quiet, private matter, but a cosmic event that shook the very sky. This made them profoundly relatable, not as distant, perfect deities, but as figures who shared in the most fundamental human experience. You could look up at their shimmering cluster and feel a sense of shared mourning, a celestial companionship in your own moments of sadness. They were proof that grief itself was a powerful, natural force, as immense and unavoidable as the turning of the seasons. But their legend did not end in the darkness of despair. The very same tears that symbolized their bottomless sorrow were also the source of the earth's renewal. Their weeping watered the fields, filled the rivers, and coaxed the seeds from the soil. This was the myth's genius, its transformative power. It taught that from the deepest loss could come the greatest nourishment. The rain that followed their grief was not a punishment, but a cleansing, a baptism for the land. It washed away the old and made way for new growth, turning barren ground into a source of life. This duality made them pillars of the ancient psyche. They embodied the complete cycle of life, where sorrow and joy, death and rebirth were inextricably linked. You could not have the green shoot without the decaying seed. You could not have the abundant harvest without the life-giving rain born from celestial tears. When a farmer planted his seeds after the autumn storms, he was participating in this eternal cycle. He was placing his trust in a process that began with a brother's death and ended with his family's survival. The Hyades were not just weather goddesses, they were spiritual guides. They showed that to grieve deeply was human, and that from that very grief, a different kind of strength could emerge, one that sustained not just an individual but the entire world. Their stars were a nightly reminder that even in our darkest moments, the potential for renewal is always waiting in the clouds. Even with their story shining brightly for millennia, the legend of the Hyades is not without its shadowy corners. One persistent mystery revolves around their very number. How many sisters actually formed this celestial sisterhood? Ancient sources are frustratingly silent or contradictory on this point. Some poets vaguely refer to them as a multitude, while others attempt a specific count, with numbers ranging from 5 to 7. This ambiguity stands in stark contrast to their famous sisters, the Pleiades, who are almost universally counted as 7. Why would the number of such important nymphs be lost? It suggests that their identity was perhaps more collective than individual, their power residing in their unity as a rain-bringing force rather than in their distinct personalities. The loss of their individual names and stories over time points to a deeper truth, that the communal aspect of their grief and their function was what truly mattered to the people who depended on their celestial tears. Another unresolved question lies at the very heart of their myth, the death of their brother Hyas. Was he killed by a lion, as some versions insist, or was it a monstrous boar that ended his life? The variation seems minor, but it speaks to the oral nature of these stories, changing with each telling around a fire. Perhaps the specific beast was less important than the universal tragedy of a life cut short, a narrative flexibility that allowed different communities to project their own fears of the wilderness onto the tale. These are not just academic curiosities, they are holes in a beautiful tapestry, reminding us that history is a story we have only partially recovered. The gaps themselves invite us to wonder. Were there once local cults in forgotten mountain villages that knew the Hyades by different names and offered them unique prayers? Did small farming communities have their own intimate rituals for the celestial nurses that were never written down, lost forever when the last person who remembered them passed away? The silence of the historical record on these points is itself a kind of story, a whisper of the countless personal relationships that everyday people once had with the stars above them. Their journey from a circle of weeping sisters to a fixed constellation is a testament to the enduring power of story. We followed their trail from the raw, human tragedy of losing a brother to their divine reward in the starry vault of night. We saw how their endless grief was transformed into the very rain that nourished entire civilizations, their tears becoming a source of life rather than just a symbol of death. This was not a simple fairy tale. It was a profound way of understanding the world, a narrative that connected the deepest human emotions to the grandest cosmic cycles. The ancient Greeks looked up at that V-shaped cluster and did not see random points of light. They saw a reflection of their own lives, their own capacity for love and loss written in the celestial script. This myth encapsulates a timeless human desire to find meaning in the patterns of the universe, to look at the unpredictable forces of nature and see a story we can understand, a drama with characters whose motives we can comprehend. It reminds us that our ancestors were not just surviving the world, they were conversing with it, finding in the rain and the stars a narrative that made their own struggles part of something larger and more beautiful. So the next time you find yourself beneath a clear night sky, look for the Hyades in the face of the bull. Remember the sisters whose sorrow waters the earth, and consider the stories still waiting in the constellations. Which celestial tale would you want to hear next? The huntress forever pursued, the great bear circling the pole, or the hero with his upraised club? Share your choice and let us continue this journey through the myths written in starlight.